Hello everybody, this is Major General Relativity with my second video in the Minecraft ReactorCraft tutorial series. In this video, we'll be covering how to build and operate a high temperature gas reactor, also known as a pebble bed reactor, which is the first type of reactor added by the ReactorCraft mod. As you can see in the page, there are two components, the pebble bed reactor core and the carbon dioxide heat exchanger. However, there are a few more things that you'll want to do before you can get started with that. The first thing is you'll want to make the coolant for the reactor, which is the carbon dioxide gas. You make carbon dioxide gas by burning either wood or coal in a furnace, and then even before you start burning it, you can put this gas collector hood right on top of the furnace. It works. You place the press down, you just place the shift right click the gas collector on top of it. And then when it's in function, you'll see that the tank is now filling up with carbon dioxide gas. You can pull the gas out of the tank either using a gas duct added by ReactorCraft or by using a fluid duct from thermodynamics, and I assume any of the other fluid pipes added by fluid pipe mods, as long as they're attempting to pull from the gas collector. I had to add the resonance servo in order for it to actually extract the gas. The gas ducts from ReactorCraft have the advantage that you don't need a servo or something like that. The gas will come out automatically. I just put it into a buffer, and then I pipe it into the reactor. So the high temperature gas reactor, the core of it is the pebble bed reactor cores and at least one carbon dioxide heat exchanger. If you don't have the heat exchanger, you're not going to get any meaningful power out of the reactor. So in the pebble bed reactor core, you simply insert a large number of these triso fuel pellets, which you can get from uranium dust and graphite in a blast furnace. So this means that you don't need the uranium centrifuge setup that you'll need for later reactors, and this makes it very easy to set up. As the reactor is in operation, it will convert the pellets to depleted triso fuel pellets, which will then be available to the reactor. So you might be wondering why I have this item conduit going into a hopper instead of just going directly into the pebble bed reactor cores. Well, there's a good response to that. In order to get the most energy out of your high temperature gas reactor, you're going to want to make sure that the temperature stays above 800 degrees Celsius at all times. So there are a few ways that you can do this. One way is that is by scaling the size of the reactor. The reactivity of each pebble bed reactor core actually depends upon the size of the entire reactor. So when each block is placed, it will check for adjacent blocks and attempt to join itself into a larger reactor structure. And then when over time, it will check the size of that reactor structure, and you'll be able to vary the individual output based on the size. As you make it bigger, up to and including 35 blocks, it will be at its maximum reactivity per block. Above that, it will start to decrease. So you can, of course, make a 300 block high temperature gas reactor, but you won't be getting the most reactivity out per block as you would if you made, say, 10 35 block reactors. This reactor right here is 14 blocks, which means that it falls in the second highest reactivity category. You can, if you really want to look at the code, you can. It's pretty easy to read and understand how the reactivity is affected, but the prime band for reactivity is 24 to 35 blocks. Anything less, and you're leaving some reactivity on the table. Anything more, same thing. And the other way to keep the temperature up is to make sure that all possible faces are covered. So if you notice right now the temperature is sitting at about 375. I cover it up. You look at the heat exchanger and you see that it's starting to heat up. So the way this works is that each high temperature pebble bed reactor core checks all of the adjacent blocks on above, below, and the four sides. And if a block counts as air, I'll go into that just a second. If it counts as air, the pebble bed reactor core will lose temperature. It wastes heat that way. If the side is covered, it does not waste heat that way, and so more heat can go into the heat exchanger. So the question is, well, why don't I just run the conduit in? The conduit is a block. So the way that the counts as air check works is first it checks, obviously, is there anything there? If there's nothing there, then it's an air block and it counts as air. And the second thing is it checks if it has a collision box. So if you have a block that you can just walk straight through, that counts as air from the point of view of the reactor. The third thing is that it checks to see if the block is a Ender IO conduit, a Buildcraft pipe block, a thermodynamics duct, or an applied energistics cable. So if it's one of those four, it still counts as air. What this means is that most of the ducting that I've used personally will count as air, and you'll be wasting heat and leaving power on the table. So what I do is I put a hopper, which will feed into the reactor fuel core. Now, what's cool is you can stack the reactor vertically. It will all count as being in the same reactor, but the fuel cores will pass fuel down the stack to each other. One thing to keep in mind is that if you feed, say, 200 fuel pellets into the hopper, and the reactor core can only hold, I think, like 40, around 40, it will pass fresh fuel pellets out the bottom hopper into whatever you're using. So it might be worth it to check for that and to pass those fuel pellets elsewhere and to operate a time delay insertion, because if you're constantly passing fresh fuel pellets through, you're wasting energy, wasting server tick time, that sort of thing. So that's how to get the most out of your reactor cores. So now you've got your reactor cores, you've got heat going. What do you do? So then you're going to want to have this carbon dioxide heat exchanger. I have mine in the middle of the reactor because that way it helps balance out the temperature. You're going to have to pay a lot more attention to this with fission reactors. With pebble bed reactors, it's not critically important because usually they're smaller, there's less heat extremes going on. But as long as it's next to one of the pebble bed reactor cores and hits 800 degrees Celsius, you're good to go. So I took that carbon dioxide gas, I piped it into the bottom of this carbon dioxide heat exchanger, and then I have a duct pulling from the top going into another buffer. If the carbon dioxide heat exchanger goes above 800 degrees Celsius, it will consume 100 millibuckets of carbon dioxide gas and output 100 millibuckets of hot carbon dioxide gas. So in general, for your reactors, you're going to want to keep this above 800 degrees Celsius as much as possible, because if it's below 800 degrees Celsius, it will still cool down a little bit even if every block is covered. The same goes for the pebble bed reactor cores. So you want to keep everything above operating temperature so that way you're not leaving any heat on the table. So you pull out the hot carbon dioxide gas. You can put it in a buffer if you want, and then you pass it on over to this heat exchanger. Now, the heat exchanger has to be powered. I have a gasoline engine running with no gearboxes into the bottom of it. But for reference, the heat exchanger, you need 8 kilowatts with a required speed of 512 radians per second. And I do not believe that there is a required torque other than like 1 Newton meter. I don't think you can get fractional torques though. Into the bottom of the heat exchanger. So you're going to want to pump the hot carbon dioxide gas, and this goes for any other hot fluid. You're going to want to pump it into the top of the heat exchanger. And then from one of the sides, you can pull out the cold liquid, which will in this case be regular carbon dioxide gas. And then you can bring that on over to the buffer or just straight into the reactor, uh, which means that you have a closed cycle of carbon dioxide gas. So if you're wondering, oh, how much coal do I have to burn to sort of support a nuclear reactor? It's not actually that much. You just need enough to get this closed circuit going. There is no loss of carbon dioxide gas unless either your heat exchanger can't keep up or something like that. But the heat exchanger is reasonably fast. As you can see here, it spends most of its time waiting for carbon dioxide gas. So when the heat exchanger has hot carbon dioxide gas and sufficient power, it will begin to consume 100 millibuckets and then tries to heat itself up towards 800 degrees Celsius. It won't go over 900 degrees Celsius. You're like, well, why is that? Because of how the temperature mechanics work, I believe it increments itself 100 degrees Celsius every time it consumes 100 millibuckets of carbon dioxide gas. So it can hit like 880 if it was at 780 before it consumed some carbon dioxide gas. Technically not how it works in real life, but it's a reasonable approximation. So it heats itself up, and then you're going to want to put steam boiler blocks around it. I have 3 steam boiler blocks, which works for the 14 block reactor, which is usually the smallest reactor I would recommend building with this. Any smaller, and you begin to lose more and more heat to inefficiencies. And so with the steam boilers, which you'll be seeing a lot more of in the regular fission reactor, you pump some water into the bottom of them. You have a steam line coming out the top, and then you just put 1 to 3 of them around the heat exchanger. The heat exchanger doesn't waste heat transferring it to non-ReactorCraft blocks. It will only transfer the heat to steam boilers. However, if you're spending most of the time where the steam boiler isn't boiling water fast enough to keep up with the heat exchanger does have the passive heat loss, I believe. Yes, it has the passive heat loss similar to the reactor core blocks. So in general, in a perfect world, you would keep the heat exchanger at just above 100 degrees Celsius. The same for the steam boilers. As you can see here, I'm not really sticking to that, but this is about as efficient as you can make it, where the steam boilers are always rated around 100 degrees Celsius. You don't want to spend too long where the heat exchanger is routinely falling below 100 degrees Celsius, because the steam boilers are cooling down even if they're not boiling water. So again, that's losing heat. Then you have steam lines that are coming out of the steam boiler, and those will go into a turbine. Or they might be able to go into a high pressure turbine. Reka might have changed that so that high pressure turbines don't take pebble bed reactor steam. But in my episode on power generation, I will be discussing how to get power out of the steam from your reactor. But either way, this is a closed loop. Hot carbon dioxide gas comes out of the reactor into the heat exchanger, emits cold carbon dioxide, which goes back into the reactor to get warmed up. You feed in water, out comes steam. And so then the pebble bed reactor cores are very safe. If you're just starting with ReactorCraft, I would have no problem putting it in your base. They don't melt down. If you somehow get them to go over their maximum temperature, which I believe is 4,000 degrees Celsius, they will simply convert themselves into a lava block. No radiation, no explosion, very nice and easy. And in order to get them over 4,000 degrees Celsius, you really have to be going for that pretty hard. So either way, this was the episode on high temperature gas reactors. If you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the comments, and I hope you have a good day.